Welcome to IVF This, episode 77, The Burden of Knowledge. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. After 10 years of primary and secondary infertility due to both male and female factor infertility, I am now the mother to 3 beautiful miracles. I am married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you how to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, my beautiful friends. I hope you are all doing so well. I'm actually recording this at 3:30 in the morning. It is 3:30 a.m. here in Austin, Texas. And that is because COVID has come once again for my home. And all 5 of us are home at the same time. And so it's very difficult to find a quiet place in order to record this for you guys. So 3:30 in the morning, we are here. We are ready whenever you're listening to this. Just want you to know what's going on for me. Anyway, before we get started, I want to let you all know that I have opened up my schedule to make some more room for mini sessions. And mini sessions are my no charge kind of intro to coaching that I offer to everyone. It's 30 minutes of straight coaching. And at the end, we can talk about working together and what that would look like. But that conversation is totally optional. You get the session no matter what, and the coaching at no charge and with no obligation. Also want to let you know that in a couple of months, I'll be kicking off another round of my small group coaching program. It's a group of 5 to 10 women. It's 13 weeks, and I've got a special surprise goodies and guest coaches that I have in mind for this coming round that I'm super excited about. I think it's important to know that group coaching is remarkably beneficial. Number one, because it typically is easier to accept. It's a fraction of what I charge for my one-on-one clients. But it's also a great opportunity to see other people being coached. A lot of times we get more insight when we're watching someone being coached than when we're actually being coached ourselves. So it's really important to keep in mind. So if you want to get in on that, you can get on my mailing list, my email list, and that's the best way to get upcoming details. So a couple of ways to get on my email list. You can go directly to my website, www.ivfthiscoaching.com. And on the homepage, about halfway down, you'll see information about a free mini course called The 3 Steps to Managing Your Anxiety. It's a 15-minute video, and it's all based on the stuff that I talk about all of the time. So if you're a fan of the podcast, it'll sound really familiar. So you watch that, it sends it automatically to your email. And then the other way to get on the email list to access the mini training video is through my social media profiles. There's links directly to the mini course. Both roads lead to the email list, so check it out. Today's going to be a little bit of a quick hit, but something that's come up a lot in my private clients, so I wanted to take a bit of time to talk about it. How many of you have ever said to yourself, I wish I could feel the way I did when I first started trying to conceive? Or maybe if you've experienced loss or failed transfers or failed cycles, you might think, I wish I could be excited or hopeful about my upcoming transfer or beta or whatever it is. Maybe it's that you have a friend or family member that is pregnant or just starting trying to conceive, and you see their excitement and you wish you could feel that. So let's refresh for a minute and remember that excitement and hope are feelings, and all feelings are related to our thinking. Every time. Excitement and hope don't get free passes. It's all the same mechanism. Now, that does not mean that circumstances don't influence our thinking, right? Think of circumstances, which are the things that happen to you and around you, the things that are completely neutral. I want you to think about those things as like opportunities to have a thought about. A lot of our thinking, in fact, most of our thinking, is automatic and unconscious. So every circumstance gives you the opportunity to have a thought. There's no good or bad, either or. Thoughts are just sentences in your brain. It doesn't need to be assigned any moral value. It's important to remember that your thoughts are like an amalgamation of socialization, culture, family structure, upbringing, and experiences. And that's where the burden of knowledge comes into play. Some people call it the curse of knowledge. I prefer burden. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's just important to be aware of it. So there's a couple of ways to think about the burden or the curse of knowledge. The first, and probably the most discussed, is what happens when you're communicating with someone and you assume that that person with whom you're communicating has a background knowledge of what you're talking about, and so they're able to understand what it is. Most of us have experienced this. Maybe you're chatting with someone and you're talking about your job or something that you're really interested in. And maybe you're using a lot of jargon to describe it, even for something that you might consider quote unquote common knowledge, right? My husband loves to do this when he tells me about his work. For reference, he's a PhD economist, and the one and only economics course I took was a summer semester in high school when I was trying to get credits in order to graduate early. You can bet a whole lot of information did not get retained in that 20 plus year gap. But sometimes when we talk about things, he has this like confident belief that I would understand what an ISLM curve is. Yeah, no. I know that there's at least one other PhD economist that listens to the podcast, so she might find that funny. But anyway, it's this assumption that the person you're speaking to has more knowledge than they actually have. Another aspect of the burden of knowledge, and this one is kind of what I typically reference to my clients, is when you have experienced things and now you see things a certain way, right? So, my background, many of you know, I was a medical social worker. I worked in a lot of different settings: oncology, physical medical rehabilitation, hospice, hospitals, all kinds of things in 15 years. And there would be certain things that you would hear or see, and you would almost immediately have this like sinking feeling because you had seen it before and you knew it probably was not going to be good. It wasn't that you were prophetic or that you could see the future or anything like that. There are just certain things that you're able to make like an educated guess that something might be up, right? Not certainty, something's brewing there. So, those are two aspects of the burden of knowledge that I kind of wanted to explain. So, let's get into an example from the top of the show. For those of you that wish you could be as excited about trying to conceive as you were when you first started, that's the burden of knowledge. When you talk to some cute, trying to conceive noob and they're practically vibrating with giddiness, and you're like, well, I wish you the best of luck. And you're kind of envious or even amused at their naivete. That's the burden of knowledge. Having difficulty believing you could actually be pregnant after a positive beta or home pregnancy test because it's been such a long journey and maybe you've experienced loss too. Yeah, that's the burden of knowledge. You have experienced things that have colored the way that you view things. In this case, the family creation journey. Don't want to have a conversation with your boss about a possible promotion because you've talked to them before and you've always felt blown off? That ex that kept trying to crawl their way back into your life and you kind of went back and forth, but you were pretty sure they were never going to change? Right. One of my personal experiences related to the loss of my mother-in-law. My husband, my beautiful, amazing husband, has lost both of his parents, and he is only 40. His father passed away very, very unexpectedly in 2011, and it was an enormously traumatic time. It was 4 months before we got married, and it was excruciating to watch my soon to be and eventual husband navigate this trauma and grief. Not that I didn't have my own, but it was certainly nowhere near the extent that he was experiencing. So when we found out my mother-in-law was sick, and this was just a couple of months before she passed, my immediate thoughts was about how difficult the first year or so following my father-in-law's death was for my husband. And really, I just kind of wanted to wrap him in this protective bubble wrap and save him from that type of hurt. And so I thought about that all the time. Now, obviously, I'm not responsible for my husband's. Bleh. Now, obviously, I am not responsible for my husband's feelings, and there is no protecting anyone from that kind of hurt. But I think you understand what I'm saying. I had this burden of knowledge, that experience of watching him grieve, like 11 years prior. Even though the situations were very different, she was acutely and severely ill, while my father in law's passing was completely unexpected. My husband had time to say goodbye and spend time with her. These were things he was not afforded with his father. So with his mom, there was a lot of anticipatory grieving versus his father's passing. So the situations were completely opposite, but I continued to think about that and kind of anticipate and stress ahead of time as to what that experience would be like for him because I had that burden of knowledge. And there are tons of examples of how this plays out in our lives. This is just one of many. And most of these examples are pretty innocuous, right? This is how our brain evolved. We didn't go back and eat the poisonous berries because we realized they were poisonous, because our friend died when we watched them eat the berries thousands and thousands of years ago. So our brain was like, oh, we're going to file that away so that that never happens again, right? That is a burden of knowledge. So here are a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, your beliefs and your experiences aren't facts and they don't predict the future. Just because you have a burden of knowledge of something and this is something you've experienced or seen play out and time again, doesn't mean that that is your destiny to continue experiencing. Again, it's not prophecy or anything like that. It's experience. And experience, while valuable, doesn't equate to certainty, facts, or future. A lot of times we think we know how something will go because of that burden of knowledge, and then we end up not doing it because it's like, what's the point? Or conversely, we spend so much time focused and freaking out on that potentiality coming true that maybe it doesn't happen. And then you have suffered needlessly in anticipation of it, right? Your knowledge burden doesn't mean that something will never work. It is data. Data is used in making decisions. And the second thing is, if you're having difficulty with the whole, I want to get back to wherever I was before the loss, before I started trying, before whatever, our experiences, our knowledge burdens carry with us. Even if I put you in a time machine and sent you back 3 years, you would still have that knowledge. It doesn't go away. So holding on to this thought of, I just want to go back when, or I wish I could feel the way I felt when, those are unfair fantasies that kind of keep you locked into feeling terrible in your current situation. I think for some of us, this idea of I want to go back when is a way of resisting or rejecting your current situation, fighting against acceptance, fighting your reality. And it makes sense. Most of us believe that in order to accept something, we have to like it. And I am here to tell you that is categorically false. Acceptance isn't false positives, toxic positivity, forced gratitude, platitudes, anything like that. Acceptance is about letting a situation be to what it is. I had this incredible session with one of my clients, one of my long term clients this week, and we were talking about acceptance and how she felt. One day she felt this beautiful feeling of acceptance and she felt light and calm and peaceful. And then, literally, the very next day, not even like 18 hours later, someone incredibly close to her announced a pregnancy. And so, of course, she wasn't really feeling that peace and calm anymore. And so we talked about all of that. And so it's important to remember in terms of acceptance, it's not like this switch that you flip and it just stays in the on position and you always get to feel peace and calm moving forward. Acceptance is a lot like grief. It's a feeling. It ebbs and flows depending on what is happening in your brain. It is an emotion, and our emotions change based on our thinking. When I was talking about all of this with my client, we kind of broke down how she thought she would get to feel once she accepted her journey, right? As if it was a one-time decision. She kind of expected to feel calm and peaceful for the remainder of her journey. But I explained to her acceptance is a conscious act every single time. And you're going to have to consciously choose it, just like you constantly choose to continue loving your partner. Loving and staying married or staying in a dedicated partnership is a conscious effort. And so when we kind of talked about and expanded out her definition of what acceptance was, this is what she came up with. Allowing an experience to be what it is and not try to make something it's not. And that might change throughout different aspects of the experience. And experience isn't not just one thing, it is going to have ups and downs. So, by expanding her definition of acceptance to include accepting all the emotions that come with this journey, too, she was able to kind of relieve some of that pressure of having to feel peace and calm all the time because it's not a realistic expectation. You're not going to be able to escape the feelings that are involved or included in this journey. So we have to take into consideration all of the circumstances and thoughts associated with these experiences, the good and the bad, because that is all part of the process. Having a burden of knowledge is not a bad thing. It's just having it. It's just something that you have. So then people will say, well, I hate it because my brain just plays like on a loop all the bad stuff that's happened. Yeah, that's a brain's job. Our brains have 3 fundamental jobs, and it's the same for everyone. Seek pleasure, avoid pain, and be as efficient as possible. So playing those greatest hits of awful has a purpose. Your brain is not your enemy when it does that. It's just kind of saying, look at this hurt. This hurt a lot. It was really scary or whatever it was, and we don't want to feel this way ever again. So we want to remind you of this thing over and over so you know what to look for and to avoid it. Right? That is an unconscious, primitive habit brain thing. It is going to do that. You can expect it. But you also have this beautiful prefrontal cortex that you can use as like an adult in the brain. You can acknowledge, yeah, brain, I see you. That did happen. Oh, man, it hurt like hell. It was really frustrating. It was super painful, whatever it was. It doesn't mean it will happen again. It could, but it's not a guarantee. You can even throw in like a thank you. I don't know if you're feeling generous, like thanks for trying to keep me safe, even if it's like in this ridiculous ass backwards way. And I think that's kind of the last thing that I want to cover is this extension of this acceptance piece. I think for a lot of us, we start to view our brains as our enemies. Your brain is not waging war on you. I know it feels that way, but it's not. It's doing all of the things it has evolved to do to keep us safe. So I want you to remember that having a burden of knowledge is not a bad thing. It is experience. My mom always says education comes in many forms. And I've always loved that because education is experience. Experience is education. Now, this is probably not the experience or the education that you would have ever wanted. None of us wanted this. But what we don't need to do, what never helps anything, is bullying ourselves for how we think and feel. No good comes from that. Only continued suffering. This process is painful, but you do not have to suffer. The suffering is always optional. Okay, that is what I have for you today. Have a beautiful week, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.